Missiles are flying, empires are reshaping, so I'm reading books. Here are 5 books I want to recommend to you in 2026. The first book is Tian Xiaofei's Bacon Fire and Shooting Stars. The title comes from a poem by Yu Xin. A shooting star illuminates the dusk, bacon fires burn the plain at night. The Liang Dynasty, 502 to 557 AD, it lasted only 55 years in China's long history. But Tian Xiaofei argues it was one of the most brilliant and the most underestimated dynasties in Chinese history. Emperor Wu reigned for 47 years. He is a devout Buddhist, a poet, a man of extraordinary culture. He died starving, besieged in his own palace by a warlord he had trusted. And then it talks about Crown Prince Xiaogang. He wrote the most delicate poetry of his era about light and shadow, about candlelight, about texture of perception. When the dynasty fell, he refused to submit. The warlord Hou Jing took the capital. The citizens had lived in peace for so long, they had forgotten how to fight. You can see the prosperity of empires soften people in times of abundance and then kill them in times of collapse. The Anlushan rebellion in the Tang time followed the same logic, and so does the Middle East today. Yu Xin, the poet, was a survivor. He was forced to live out his days in the north. He never returned to the south. In his lament for the south, he wrote, "The sun sets, the road stretches far. What world is this? The general has gone, the great tree falls. The warrior does not return, the cold wind howls." He spent his entire life mourning a world that had disappeared. So there's one thread in this book that haunts me. The Buddhist philosophy of light and in the Liang dynasty echoes deeply in the Zoroastrian dualism of light and shadow from ancient Persia. So we do see that civilizations speaking to each other across geography and time. And Tian Xiaofei writes something that stopped me. So the existence of shadow proves the existence of light. And I think that sentence is the whole book. The second book is Christophe de Beleg's The Islamic Enlightenment. So there is a persistent Western narrative. The Islamic world was stagnant in the modern era. This book dismantles that narrative. It writes from Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798 and then through the Ottoman Tanzimat reforms and Iran's Hajj upheavals. The Middle East experienced a violent collision with modernity that most Western readers have never been taught. For me, the Iranian chapters stay with me, especially the Nasr ad-Din's time. Nasr ad-Din Shah, he ruled for half a century, the most contradictory figure of that turbulent age. He was fascinated by modernization and terrified of what it would unleash. In 1896, Nasr ad-Din Shah was assassinated, and I would say that bullet carried a century of unresolved questions. One of the figures I can't forget is Qura al-An, a female Babi theologian. In 1848, at a religious conference filled with men, she walked in and removed her veil. She declared the old law finished, and obviously at the time her thoughts would be prosecuted because we even know today women cannot take off their veils freely. In 1852, she was executed by Nasr ad-Din. She was dressed in a white wedding gown and she was calm, died at 35-year-old. So after this book, you'll understand the Middle East is not a story of secular versus religious, backward versus progressive. It was never meant to be. The third book is Thich Nhat Hanh's Silence. So we live surrounded by noise, not just the noise outside, but the endless internal conversation that never stops. Thich Nhat Hanh writes, "There's a radio playing in our head, radio station NST, non-stop thinking." So our mind is filled with noise, and that's why we can't hear the call of life, the call of love. Our heart is calling us, but we don't hear. So we wake up every day and reach for our phones. We'll fill every commute with podcasts. We come home and talk to our families, our friends, relatives, children, husband and wife. We fill every gap with an input because we're afraid that what we might encounter if we stop. He says, silence is essential. We need silence just as much as we need air, just as much as plants need light. If our minds are crowded with words and thoughts, there's no space for us. As much as we use our five senses, we enjoy the world of colors and forms, but we're also trapped by them. The inner ground that belongs only to you. You can't reach it through eating, scrolling, or watching something. So listening to yourself is a practice. It requires training. The fourth book is also Thich Nhat Hanh, Old Past White Clouds. His retelling of Buddha's life. What this book does is demythologize. So Buddha was not a figure of miracles. He was an actual man who observed the reality carefully and kept correcting himself as a mortal. He got sick as well. He went on begging. He washed his feet by himself. And he argued with his disciples too. He's just an ordinary little old man. Thich Nhat Hanh writes, a finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. The finger is needed to know where to look for the moon. But if you mistake the finger for the moon itself, you will never know the real moon. Every doctrine and every framework, every analysis, these are the fingers pointing at the moon, not the moon itself. At the end of his life, the Buddha chose to die in Kushinara. It's an obscure village no one had heard of. So Ananda back then was shocked and he was like, oh wait, you chose such an unknown place to die? But the Buddha didn't explain. We all know that the Buddha was born to riches. He was born a prince, but he spent his entire life moving towards radical decentralization. And I think what is the way? The way is humble. Last one is Hu Yingmeng's The Unthinkable Life. It's her autobiography. The world of spiritual exploration in many ways is still dominated by men. You think about the Buddha, Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad, they are all men. So as if women are obstacles to practice rather than its subjects. Who is Hu Yingmeng? So she was a Taiwanese legend. She was a great beauty, an actress, but she spent the second half of her life translating Krishnamurti and exploring her own inner world. This autobiography traces how she moved through the veils of love, family, beauty, and fame, and step by step reclaimed the sovereignty over her own interior self. A woman's path through spiritual practice is different. She faces the thing like the body, relationships, emotional attachment, and also the fading of beauty. These are not obstacles to practice, they are the practice itself. So for me to find a woman writing her journey, seeking the way, is kind of like the light in darkness. 5 books spanning medieval China, Islamic modernity, Buddhism, and contemporary female spirituality. They're all answering the same question. When the world is burning, empires are reshaping, in all those noise and collapse, who are you?